Have you noticed that politicians struggle to enact the things they run on? That regardless of who wins the election, lawmakers cannot pass whatever legislation they like. They find themselves bound by what is popular, or at least their sense of it. They can only act within a narrow set of ideas, and that range is called the Overton window. And on the Overton Window podcast, we look at issues around the country and talk to the people who change what is politically possible. The winning strategy first starts with a clear-eyed assessment of what people think about an issue right now and what our politicians expect their reactions to be if they change. The Overton window is a powerful tool to identify what needs to change in order to affect this calculation. And today I'm joined by my colleague, Mike Reitz, the Executive Vice President here at the Mackinac Center, to explain and to show how we use the Overton window. Mike, welcome.
Thanks for having me on. This is actually my first appearance on the Overton Window podcast.
Yes, well, most people haven't been on the podcast yet, but I'm glad to have you on. Let's set the stage. What's an issue that you care about right now?
I think education reform is something I'm watching pretty closely, both here in Michigan and around the country.
Okay.
And by education reform, what I mean specifically is, are we making available to parents and families a wide range of educational options to students, or are we restricting them to the government schools that are, essentially in that neighborhood? Since COVID, 29 states have expanded or created school choice programs and have done a lot of good work in that arena. Michigan is dragging at the back of the pack. We are not doing the same things that other states are doing, and I think it's going to hurt our competitiveness in the long run.
So what do we need in Michigan?
So in Michigan specifically, we have to amend the state constitution for this to happen. In our state constitution, there's a provision that prohibits the direct or indirect support of any private school using public funds.
The infamous Blaine Amendment.
There you go. Yep, Article 8, Section
Yes.
2 of the Constitution. And there has been a lot of litigation around the country around whether or not you can restrict the use of public dollars in that way, or if they should be available to go to other forms of education.
Including some from our own legal team?
Including some from our own legal team, exactly. And yet, what we see in Michigan is that there's been a lot of resistance to that idea, both politically and from policymakers.
Yes, and in fact, just from having history in the state of Michigan, I know when it's even brought up of like the most direct way to change this amendment to allow for more school choice would be to have a constitutional amendment, ask voters to change this. And that happened. The most recent time was in 2001. That's now 23 years ago. So we have a different electorate right now. But they say, look, we asked voters to change this. They said no. We don't know that anything has really changed in the political environment to get them to say yes. Right. At least a lot of people on our side who want to see this thing change look at that and saying it's just not popular among voters.
Right.
Do you think that's really the bound right now?
I don't know that it is. As you said, the last time this was before the voters was more than 20 years ago. And so when you examine polling data or other kind of data of what people want, it doesn't necessarily bear out that vote. But these things are hard to predict. Putting an issue before the voters, it's not as easy as just running a poll. It's a consequential and expensive process. And then, of course, it depends on who shows up to vote either yes or no. So it's not even an exact, the vote is not an exact snapshot of voter opinions. And so, for a lot of measures, someone who's trying to get something passed through the popular initiative process, they'll say, well, you better start with a really high level of approval, because once you encounter the opposition, it's going to go down a little bit.
Once it's on the ballot,
Once
you
it's
get
on the ballot.
the opposition chance to organize against it.
Exactly.
And in this case, the opposition has a lot of powerful resources at its disposal as well.
Right.
All right, so I guess that's two things that are important to understand about the Overton window, one of which is what what do you actually need to change this policy? In this case, we want more school choice option. The boundary is this constitutional amendment, and one of the reasons why it's a boundary is that we're just not sure whether voters would vote to change that section if they called the vote, and even calling a vote requires a lot.
It does require a lot of resources. So I mentioned 29 states have changed their law or expanded school choice programs. I believe in every one of those, it was a statutory change. So, there you just need a political majority or a majority in the legislature, and then a governor willing to go along with signing the program, and then you can get that change. In Michigan's case, it would require a constitutional amendment, or perhaps litigation that called into question the constitutionality of that provision. But if you go the constitutional amendment route, you're talking millions of dollars just to get it on the ballot, and then potentially tens of millions of dollars to educate voters on the merits of the idea.
So I think that's a pretty fair assessment of where we are right now. Okay, what do we do about it?
Yeah.
Like, what's going to make it more likely to change this constitutional amendment, to get courts to acknowledge or to supersede the interpretation that they have on this amendment right now? Like, what's the next step?
So I mentioned 29 states since COVID.
Yes.
And this, I think, is one of the first elements of one of the ingredients needed for change or reform. You have to have a critical mass of people who care about it, who say, yeah, this is the right thing to do. Let's do it. And I don't know exactly what it was about having schools shut down and having children attending school in people's own living rooms, and maybe it was the parents watching over their shoulders. Maybe it was objections over some of the curriculum. Maybe it was just dissatisfaction. That how dare they shut the kids' school down? We needed this. This is part of our community fabric. But what had previously been either a neutral or a negative for school choice advocates, parental opinion, I think has suddenly been activated in their favor. And now, when as you look around the country at other states that have really embraced school choice, you have a very significant portion of families saying, yes, this is the right thing to do. So I think that's a big one.
All right, let's talk about that. And Corey DeAngelis was a previous guest. He has an entire book about this called The Parent Revolution. Check out that episode for more details about it. But what we're talking about here in the state of Michigan is whether parents, they did change the bounds of what is politically possible before the reaction through COVID. I can see a good case for that, but how do you know? Yeah,
well, then you do have to look at opinion polling, surveys. You have to assess, where is the mood of communities.
And intensity.
And the intensity of the feeling. And then I think one thing that is different than the public vote that you referenced that was more than 20 years ago. What are the forms of education choice that people are experimenting with right now? So today, compared to 20 plus years ago, there are more students in charter schools. Private schooling is certainly an option for people, and I don't know exactly how today's enrollment compares to 20 years ago. Home education is more popular.
I assume on that one that private schools are, I don't know their proportions, but the main factor is probably the same thing that's affecting public schools. It's that there's just fewer K-12 students than there used to be.
Right. Yeah, overall that's true. So it affects enrollment overall. And then, of course, you've got home education and learning centers. There's a variety of ways to educate a student that people can pursue. I think COVID kind of unlocked a lot of creative innovations around that are even possible within a state as restrictive as Michigan.
Are there enough parents to really matter on this issue? Because we do, I mean, they're an important constituency. There are a lot of them. But there are a lot of people in the state of Michigan who are voters who don't have kids in the public education system.
Yeah, and there are also some fairly strong opponents to any changes to the status quo. So you have that problem of, kind of a concentrated, focused opposition and maybe an unorganized and dispersed group of people who would want this change. So how does a group of volunteer, unorganized parents organize against the power of the Michigan Education Association or even the existing K-12 school system with the Association of Superintendents and school boards and all the other entities that exist to advocate for just leaving things just as they are?
How do unorganized parents organize to counteract the power of the teachers union and the rest of the education establishment?
Well, one step is you've got to meet them and get to know them, and that's something that we've been doing. And have you had Molly Masek on the program yet?
Not yet, but we had one of her counterparts in Arizona talk about organizing both parents but also education service providers.
Yeah. So our colleague Molly Masek has spent a lot of time over the last year or so getting out into communities and finding people who are innovating within the existing options for school choice and unique educational programs and delivery. I think that's kind of step one. And if you look at any social change or any kind of grassroots movement that is organic, it really does start with a handful of people. It's never a majority of people that instigate change. It's usually a focused minority of people who make a compelling case for why that is better than this. So you've got to get to know those people. You've got to begin to identify relationships where they can bring their influence to bear. So perhaps we have a state lawmaker who needs to embrace this idea. Well, are there people in their community that are benefiting from school choice programs that they ought to meet? Can we make those kinds of introductions and begin to make the case to a wider circle of people? I think it's also helpful to have influential voices speak out in support of an important idea. And you know this because we've talked about it, but just recently in Pennsylvania, they are attempting to enact some changes to their...
The governor ran on school choice, hasn't done anything, and people really want him to hold him accountable for that.
Right, and the hoped for program is Lifeline Scholarships.
Yes.
And it would essentially offer to families that they could take their education dollars for each child and plug it into the school of their choice and not just be restricted to the traditional K-12 system with the public school. Jay-Z, the rapper and kind of the media mogul, just came out in support of this program.
I thought he was a New York guy.
He is from Brooklyn, and I'm not sure why the Pennsylvania connection exists for him, but he has spoken out in support of it.
Yes.
And
powerful voice.
It's a powerful voice.
Unexpected on this issue.
And unexpected, so it kind of draws attention to it. Like, oh, I didn't even know this was an issue, but now someone who I recognize is speaking on it. So that kind of influencer leadership is useful. And then political leadership, I think, is important as well.
I would ask you what celebrity we need to endorse school choice in the state of Michigan, but that's not something that you can really plan for. Or at least, I don't know, maybe someone in the School Choice Coalition in Pennsylvania did reach out to Jay-Z's people. I don't know. But I bet that's something a little more organic and unexpected than that.
Well, the more you have people in a alternative education program, as they come of age and attain some kind of success, that provides success stories for people to look to. It used to be kind of a rare thing for people to educate their children at home. And I mean, in the last 100 years, because before that, it was pretty common. But in the last 100 years, it's not an incredibly popular thing, or common. But certainly now, today, compared to say 40 years ago, everyone can pretty much say, "Oh yeah, I know a family that does home education." So you familiarize people with new forms of education just because it reaches a point of ubiquity or a tipping point where enough people have heard about it.
There is one thing I think we got to talk specifically about because it's an alternative method to get social change. Besides convincing enough people, convincing enough people that school choice is going to be popular, that they would vote against its constitutional amendment, and then to get enough people to convince someone to organize initiatives to put that on the ballot. The other one is maybe the courts will do something.
Right.
And that is an important thing because the courts do get to interpret law.
Yep.
There's a case to be made about why this Blaine Amendment is unconstitutional. In fact, this Supreme Court has ruled that a number of these type of amendments are unenforceable or something to that effect. I don't know the exact litigation. So tell me about the legal strategies, because that's the other alternative to get these policy changes.
Right, and currently the Mackinac Center is representing 5 families along with attorney John Bursch, who's a well-known constitutional attorney here in Michigan. We're representing 5 families in a challenge to the Blaine Amendment here in Michigan. And the idea there is to say, there's some sort of discriminatory impact of these Blaine amendments from yesteryear. And I guess it's probably worth explaining a little bit about that. The Blaine amendments are named for a congressman who was also a U.S. senator at one point, I believe James Blaine. And
we Jameses are powerful people.
Yeah, you got to watch out for him. His proposed amendment to the U.S. Constitution was to prohibit any use of public dollars for Catholic education. And there was real animus toward the Roman Catholic Church in America when he was moving this idea forward.
In a way that's different today.
Yes. And that was rejected at the U.S. constitutional level. It's hard to amend the Constitution, and that's true for a reason.
But like we've seen with a lot of things, it takes a lot to move federal policy. But states do a lot of different things.
And that's what happened. A number of states adopted Blaine-like amendments to their state constitution that prohibited the use of public dollars for religious educational institutions. And so what the U.S. Supreme Court has done in the last 5 or 6 years is to say, look, just because education is being offered by a Christian or a religious school or a Catholic school, that may not preclude them from getting public dollars as long as the dollars are going to core instruction and not toward religious proselytizing.
Yeah.
And so the court in 2 or 3 cases now has indicated that it's more tolerant of dollars flowing to private schools and certainly to religious private schools as well.
All right, so I guess we can summarize the issue right now, which is we think that there is some benefits that can accrue to the public that would be in the public interest to have more school choice. That we can improve education this way, make sure that we're a more educated public, and this would provide a lot of benefits to the public. We can't do that right now because of these amendments. And there are 2 ways to get rid of those amendments, one of which is to ask voters to do it, and the other one is to have the courts. We're pursuing both of those options. One is just to have a lawsuit and actually challenge it, but the other one is a little bit more complicated because we think that getting voters to approve an amendment to the Constitution is within the Overton window right now. We just have to ask voters to do it. We recognize that there are reasons to be skeptical of that. we've worked with some people to try and answer the objections that people might have. But on top of that, we're not just saying we think that this is true today. We're also trying to make it easily true, as in convincing more people. Like we've been researching and writing about this issue since late 80s.
Right.
Through the entire life of the Mackinac Center. But we're also organizing parents. We're helping to find people to be champions of this issue, to put a human face on this, to try and find some people who are going to speak up. And we also think that there have been some changes in the political environment.
Yeah.
COVID creates parents as a powerful constituency, and lawmakers have changed their calculus about school choice. At least it clearly has in other states that have done these 29 expansions of school choice.
Right.
All right. So did I do a good job of summarizing where
That's
we are?
a terrific summary. and I think you brought it back to like why should we care in the first place? So okay, we understand the objective and the obstacles that are in the way of what you want to accomplish, but why care in the first place?
Yeah.
And the answer there is that people ought to be free to pursue the education options for their families, for their kids, that best suit them. And if you ask the question of who gets to decide these sorts of things, we think putting a lot of that authority and independence in the hands of families is the right way to go, as opposed to the legislature setting education policy that then flows down to millions of students and is delivered in the exact same way. Children are different. Students learn differently from each other. Families have different needs and different priorities. And
they're in the best place to understand what they need.
And they're in the best place to know what they need. And so having a wide range of options available to them is the right thing to do, and it will lead to better educational outcomes. There will be a little more competition among various sorts of schools, charter school or cyber school or private or public. That's not a bad thing. That is a good thing. That leads to stronger outcomes. It leads to more competition for talented teachers, and it leads to more of an environment where we're raising educational outcomes as opposed to what we see right now, which is we're increasing our expenditures and the results are going down.
Yeah, which is, again, like power of research can demonstrate that. It's the power of good argumentations and committed people of trying to really understand the morality at play and to give out messages that resonate with people.
Yep.
To find heroes, to find examples, to find something that can tug at your moral outrage, and something that you can feel good about supporting as well. And finding people to deliver that message to. These are the things that we are doing to help shift what is politically possible on this issue. So I think that's a good way of demonstrating some of how we use the Overton window, how it affects our thinking and affects our strategy. But now I think we're going to do some quick fire, because that's not the only thing. What I want you to do is simply to react to some of these important issues of like, what could help and what could hurt on these issues. Recognition by Michigan of other states' occupational licenses. What could help and what can hurt?
Good question. One of the major changes that's happened just recently is Governor Whitmer has signed legislation saying that if you're a member of the military or in a military family and you move from a state into Michigan, that we are going to recognize your out-of-state license as being valid for purposes of Michigan practice. So these would be things anywhere from chiropractor to teacher to nurses, occupational therapists. I don't remember the exact range of occupations that we cover with that, but that military reciprocity is a good move forward. I think we need to make the case for why that ought to be available to more than just families in the military. That should be the case for anyone. so we need more examples of why this is inhibiting our ability to attract people to the state. There's a lot of conversation about population in Michigan and creating new jobs. And this is a way to do it. So that's what could help. What could hurt is we have an ever-growing thicket of occupational licenses that we keep adding to. And unfortunately, these usually don't come into existence for entirely altruistic reasons. They are ways of regulating a industry that the industry brings on itself that kind of makes it hard for other people to come in. You know, there's sort of an underbelly to these regulations, or a darker side. So it's important to point those things out and provide examples, as we often do, of how inconsistent these regulations are.
I agree. Examples of harm can help. Lobbies exerting their influence to protect their industry is a common threat. I think one thing that's holding us back a little bit is just intensity. It's tough to get people really engaged in this issue, even when you convince them. But the examples of harm is one way to help bring out people's intensities.
Well, and we've been proud to work with the ACLU on this issue, and I think in Michigan they've provided really good leadership on it, because we've had those conversations with them that, you know, these regulations tend to hurt people at the lower rungs of the economic ladder. And so if we really care about giving people a leg up and getting them started on a path toward prosperity, we ought to open as many occupations to them as we possibly can.
All right, let's move on.
Okay.
Electric utility competition.
Oh, yeah, big one.
Big one.
Okay, so we probably have to, you want to move fast, but we have to set the stage a little bit.
Yes, of course. You're welcome, listeners.
So in Michigan, you have a limited number of options for who pays or who's providing your electricity. I mean, the big ones here are consumers and DTE, but it's not like you can go to the electricity grocery store and say, well, I'd like this provider or that provider, just like you would order cereal, you know, like pull cereal off the shelf. You know, it's a regulated monopoly, and it's a permitted monopoly here in Michigan. What we see, some of the harms that we're seeing there is that in Michigan, our electricity costs are higher than surrounding states, and our reliability, you know, like the number of blackouts that we have or power outages, our reliability is worse than many surrounding states, and the grid is fragile. So what would we need to do to change that? Well, we would need to diversify the provider market. You know, so more people or more companies were providing electricity. You could buy it off the market, not just from a single or two providers. And we would need to be sure that the generation of electricity is happening in kind of reliable and cost-effective ways. So one of the other problems that we see in Michigan right now is that we are moving away from reliable sources of energy, like coal, coal burning plants and natural gas, and moving toward wind and solar, which as much as we may want to see a day where wind and solar are providing all the electricity for a state, we are a long ways away from that technologically, and so we're going to have more blackouts. We're going to have more instability with the grid, you know, given the trajectory that we're on. What's in the way of that? Pretty simple. You have to point to the utilities first and foremost. You know, they have immense political power. They're very good at lobbying for what they want to accomplish, and they're not afraid to wade into the political process and make examples of lawmakers from time to time. They did that with Representative Gary Glenn in eliminating him from office in the primary process. They ran somebody against him in the primary, and everyone lawmakers learned the intended example from that story. Gary has since passed away, and we had a good relationship with him. But I think he would agree with that assessment.
Yeah. I guess bigger questions. Okay, but what's actually going to help on this issue?
I have watched other states grapple with this issue as well. I'm not entirely sure because if we knew what would really break through, we would probably be pursuing that. But okay, let's let's get past that point. I think in this example, of the reliability of electricity, so many people are used to just walking over to the light switch and flipping it on or off and having the light bulb react in the expected way. It just isn't something we think about that much anymore. And in a sense, that's a miracle of modern life, that we take it for granted and that we can take it for granted.
Civilizational expectations increase. These are good things.
These are good things, and electricity has done amazing things for prosperity and life expectancy and all of that. So we should be really happy about that. I think if we saw a series of failures where power went out and didn't flick back on in a couple of hours, but was gone for days or weeks, that the outcry from the public would be immense. And unfortunately, where we are headed, the trajectory is we will see that happen. I don't know when, but we are headed toward a future where electricity is more expensive and less reliable.
Let's try another issue, ending earmarks.
Okay, yeah, one of the issues that you know a lot about. Yeah. I should be interviewing you at this point. Here's a good example of the old rule in economics of concentrated benefit, dispersed costs. You have a small number of entities that benefit greatly from earmarks in the budget, and you have a wide range of individuals who may be concerned about it, but they're not organized politically. They don't have the same kind of deep pockets to seek out that kind of favor, and so I think you have to spot scandal and identify potential misuse of public resources for those kinds of programs.
So you're making me optimistic about that, not just because there have been some scandals, but that seems like something our reporters in Michigan actually care something about and are able to do some good work on this issue. They found a number of different scandals of abuse of earmarks for personal gain and otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, the story that we're familiar with here in Michigan right now is the businesswoman who negotiated a $20 million incentive or subsidy from the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, and then along the way she has to send certain spending reports back to the agency, and lo and behold, she spent $4,500 on an expensive coffee maker. It sounds great. I love a good cup of coffee, but it wasn't the wisest use of taxpayer resources. Probably not. And that one story has generated a lot of news coverage and a lot of attention from lawmakers who are asking questions like, how did this even happen? That's not what we envisioned this for. Lawmakers who vote for subsidies would like to do so thinking, oh, this is going to create jobs. This will improve the business environment. It'll help us attract companies to Michigan. What you don't expect to hear is, we bought a really fancy coffee maker. Would you like a cup of coffee? So stories like that, I think, are helpful in demonstrating the dangers of programs like that. The money is easily wasted. There's not a lot of accountability. The oversight's a joke, and there ought to be even more attention put on it.
Yeah, that is, I think that's appropriate. I think another thing that's interesting about this issue, and I've been tracking it, of course, for a long time, is that we passed a couple of budgets that didn't have hardly any earmarks in them.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a perennial political problem. In fact, it's so perennial, it was part of the discussion about the line item veto over 100 years ago, because they thought that, look, if we just give governors the ability to cancel any of these projects in the budget, they'll use it. They'll get rid of these things, and that's one way to address this problem. So at least as policy is concerned, all you need to do is convince one person, the governor, and all these things go away or don't show up in the budget in the first place.
Right.
And that requires the governor's own sensibilities, and we do change governors every 8 years or less. So yes, and I think changing the sensibility, demonstrating that these things are scandal-ridden, would be an easy way to get victory. And I'm actually optimistic about that. Maybe not for this governor who's shown a taste for district projects,
right?
But coming up for the next one.
Now, our previous governor, Governor Snyder, when he was first elected, he referred to incentives as the heroin drip of state government, which we agree, and we kind of liked that comparison. And yet he did champion a number of incentive programs over his 8 years as governor. So he demonstrated that these things are very attractive. If you compare his record to other gubernatorial administrations, you could say, okay, he lowered it. He kind of, his leadership brought down the amount that we spent as taxpayers on that sort of wasteful program. So the political leadership is important, and I think expectations from voters is important.
Yeah.
Our ability to find these sorts of stories and bring light to them is far superior today than it was 20 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago. Because of social media and digital outreach.
Yeah, and that's something that has mattered not just to the issues that we care about, but to a lot of issues, which is that embarrassing things can embarrass you faster and in front of more people than they used to.
Right.
I think that's an important change that has happened to the Overton window over time.
I think people resent hypocrisy. Voters don't like
today
hypocrisy.
And yesterday.
I think that's been true for a long time.
Yeah.
We just put out a piece in the Detroit News about Representative Kofia in Traverse City, who on the campaign trail complains about corporate profits and the profit motive, and companies should do their part in paying taxes, et cetera, et cetera. A certain flavor of rhetoric. And yet, when you examine her votes as these business subsidy programs come in front of her, she has a 100% rating voting in favor of these things.
Yeah, as in businesses need to pay their fair share, but when we're handing out businesses your share of money, she supports it.
Right. So pointing those examples out, I think, is part of the effort to raise awareness.
Yes, and I'm optimistic about that issue, even though we've had a tough legislature so far. But for more, you're going to have to pay attention to future episodes of the Overton Window. So thank you, Mike, for coming on and helping us use the Overton Window.
Thank you. Appreciate it.